Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I think I've covered all of the time zones, so thank you for being available for us today. We're very excited to share the Infoblox DNS traffic control solution and how it can deliver high-value DNS-based global server load balancing to keep your network and applications available and running while delivering network visibility all from a single pane of glass, and of course at a significantly lower cost. My name is Bob Rose. I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager located in the Tacoma, Washington office in the United States, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. We're fortunate to have with us today our Senior System Engineer, Joe Briante, from our Ontario, Canada office. Welcome, Joe.
Good morning, everyone. Hey, Bob. Thanks for having me today. I'm looking forward to our session.
Yeah, it's great. And for those of you that are in Europe, thanks so much for hanging with us here at the end of the day. We know it's been a busy, hectic workday for you, and so we're excited to share some good information. But before we get to the good stuff, I'd like to mention a few housekeeping items. We are recording today's event, and we will publish it online and through infoblox.com. We'll also be sending you a link so you can view it again or perhaps pass it along to a colleague after the presentation. If you do have questions today, please enter them in the chat window in the Zoom console. We will try to answer those in real time, but we'll certainly make some time at the end for questions and answers. And then also we will be doing a couple of polling questions today, and we really appreciate your feedback so we can better tailor the content to your interests. And then finally, we'll be sending you a copy of our latest IDC analyst report, the role of DNS-based global server load balancing in ensuring application availability and continuity, in appreciation for your attendance today. So let's go ahead and dig in and take a look at today's agenda. We're going to spend a little bit of time around some key IT initiatives and challenges and some of the trends that we're seeing in the global server load balancing space. We're also going to give you an overview and talk about the value and the architecture of DTC. We'll also spend some time on some of the features. We have a couple of use cases, and then Joe is going to actually walk us through a demo so that we can see how the solution works. And then there's a couple of case studies, and then we'll do wrap up and Q&A at the end. So why don't we go ahead and get started. Load balancing initiatives for many companies fall in a number of key categories. One is visibility. And in the area of visibility, companies want to make sure that they can automatically discover and see near real-time health and status of their topologies and pools and servers. And they want to be able to do that all from a central location. They want to be also able to monitor what's going on, to see alerts of DNS and GSLB servers based on subnet, GeoIP, and IPAM metadata. And that's one thing that we're going to get into a little bit so you can see exactly how the Infoblox IPAM metadata works. Reporting is also a key factor in terms of visibility so that you can see everything from an integrated and automated perspective. Dashboards that are available, reports, analytics, those are all key factors. And then the ability to actually share data out, especially threat data from a security ecosystem. And so these are all parts of visibility that are really important. But Joe, you know, there's also some challenges. What are you seeing out there in terms of some of the challenges that our customers are experiencing against some of these objectives?
Yeah, that's true, Bob. So, you know, there definitely are. I mean, visibility is huge, especially as, you know, as networks grow, you get many more devices being on the network, et cetera. As administrators, you know, not having a full, clear, centralized view of what devices are on the network, not only from a global server load balancing standpoint, but even just from trying to understand, you know, who's on the network, who's using it, protocols, et cetera, for security. You're going to end up with very limited views, siloed data, you know, being able to, you know, have the struggle of managing disparate systems. You know, again, definitely challenges for, you know, for network admins, especially as things start to grow. And again, lack of visibility, especially as it applies to security, you know, very difficult to protect, you know, devices that you don't know about, right? So that's an absolutely key critical component of this, and one that you know, Infoblox definitely addresses with our solution.
You know, another area that really drives a lot of focus, Joe, is reliability, right? Because
Mm.
you know, companies really want their apps to be up and available. 5 nines, 24/7, 365 is what we hear all the time. You know, the performance of their apps, they want to make sure that it's up and running, and they're fast, and it can route intelligently to the right servers regardless where in the world that you are, and the ability to actually validate the servers before you start loading traffic to that. Infoblox has got some great algorithms and some multi-tier health checks that are used in that process, so that you don't load something up just because the web server might be open, maybe the app server is not. And so, you know, validating a server is all part of reliability. And then doing disaster recovery as well. You want to make sure that it's automated and it's fast, and that there's redundancies, and you're able to get your services back up if you need to. But, you know, again, that's kind of the ideal state, right, Joe? And so there are also some challenges that companies face.
Well, there are. You know, I can't tell you how many network administrators I've spoken to over the years, that, you know, being able to, you know, just keep the infrastructure up and running is, you know, is one thing, but nothing leads to more, you know, trouble tickets open, user complaints, et cetera, than you know, services and servers that aren't performing optimally, right? So, you know, one of the biggest challenges they have is ensuring that, you know, when their network users are going to request a particular, whether it's a web page or, you know, a database server, things like that, that device needs to be up and running all the time, right? You know, I mean, nothing, you know, again, nothing leads to, you know, dissatisfied users or external customers, you know, than being directed to servers or services that are poorly responding or not even available, right? So ensuring that those services are always there, always available, and even in the event of a failure, when we start talking about you know, DR type scenarios, is absolutely critical, right? All of these are extremely, you know, difficult challenges that need to be addressed.
Another area that's a priority for companies is automation, because once, you know, you can see everything, once you can count on it to be reliable, the thing that you don't want is to have to spend a lot of time in manual processes. And so from the standpoint of automation, manageability, making sure that it's fast and accurate and it's easy to set up your GSLB, and to do provisioning and simple UI, so that people don't need a lot of extra training to just use it, right? Another thing is API automation, being able to replicate what the web experience is, and to be able to configure LBDNs and topologies, and to do the integration and quick updates across your ecosystem, your network, when you have to do a software upgrade. And then also managing traffic from an intelligence standpoint, looking at which servers are optimal, and to have the system controls in place and rules to be able to do that. And then, of course, software updates, being able to do that in just a matter of clicks and moments. And we've heard lots of stories, right, Joe, in terms of
Mm-hmm.
challenges that folks have in that end.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You know, one trend, and, you know, I know that we're going to talk about some of the trends that we're seeing in a couple of minutes, but, you know, we certainly are seeing the trends now that networks are just becoming so much more complex. More devices are coming on, cloud-based solutions, you know, et cetera, virtualization, things like that. So, you know, having that, you know, the ability to simplify that from a management perspective is extremely important. So when it comes to global server load balancing, you know, having a centralized solution with a single, you know, kind of pane of glass to allow you to provision all of that, to view it, to report on that data, is absolutely critical. And some of the unique things that we do, because we have the ability to tie in DNS, DHCP, and IPAM data, you know, makes provisioning, you know, the routing technologies that we're going to use, to direct users to, either their geographic servers or, the best performing servers, becomes absolutely critical as well. And the upgrade process, typically most networks I've seen, you're going to have, switches and routers that need to be upgraded. Your DNS servers need to be upgraded on their own, DHCP. The load balancers are all separate devices with no central management. So just managing those upgrades are extremely difficult. And, for those, I'm going to assume that most of the folks on the call today are Infoblox customers. So, for those that have gone through an upgrade, you'll realize one of the strengths of our solution is that ease of management and ease of upgrade, and being able to do that from a central location.
Well said. And so let's key off on what you were just talking about a moment ago and look at some of the trends that we're finding. Joe, one is on the dependence on e-commerce. What are you seeing out there in terms of that as we look across both in the US and Europe and even in Asia Pac?
Well, for sure. So, I mean, e-commerce is definitely exploding. I think the whole online shopping, online banking, it's becoming just much, much more prevalent, right? So, when you start looking at a lot of the online providers, ensuring that their users can get to particular servers or particular services that they need to go to is absolutely critical, because as we know, there's a lot of fierce competition out there, right? So if I'm a consumer sitting at home looking to purchase something online, if I'm not getting a response from one provider, well, I can very easily quick to half a dozen, switch over to half a dozen others. Right?
Exactly.
So that's definitely becoming much, much more critical.
Joe, we just got through the holiday season here, and I don't know about you, but I did virtually all of my shopping online. And
I did the same.
I don't know if that was your experience, but escalating traffic volumes is another thing we're seeing.
It's huge. It's huge. Again, as networks are growing, you're getting more and more devices coming up on the, trying to access those exact same resources. So, we're definitely seeing many more users kind of flooding the internet, getting on, kind of vying for those same resources. So again, ensuring that those traffic volumes are managed properly, the bandwidth is managed correctly, and from a provider standpoint, ensuring that users are directed to the best available services is, again, it's a huge trend that's happening now, and one that we're definitely helping a lot of customers with.
Yeah, another trend that we're seeing is how complex some of the applications are. I mean, you have bill payment that you can do. There's ordering tickets. I mean, you've seen all of the things that have happened in terms of Amazon, and it just goes on and on.
Well, it's true. It's again, as networks become increasingly large, more complex, well, so do the applications, right? So there's so much more strain being put on those networks, and a lot of the applications, not only are getting so much more complex, but are putting additional strains on a lot of the same resources. So, for example, when it comes time to do shopping, you've got to authenticate somewhere. Well, you need to make sure that those authentication services are available, right? That the online payment systems are available as well, right? So, again, huge explosions, in that kind of area of commerce. Is definitely a trend that we're seeing.
Another one too, Joe, and perhaps you have some personal experience on this. It's cloud and centralized computing, and the fact that everybody now seems to be either working from home or working in the field remotely. These are all challenges as well, and needs and trends that are coming along.
Well, they are, Bob. It's absolutely right. I mean, as most of our customers know, we're, Infoblox is definitely, heavily into the cloud environment, but we're definitely seeing many more resources moving up to public clouds, whether it's, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, as some examples. There's a lot of private clouds being built as well, virtualization. That's definitely a lot of the trends that we're seeing, not only affecting networks, but again, affecting, things like basic e-commerce, right? Now instead of, replicating a lot of that data locally, you're now going to be accessing clouds from different, different parts of the world. So ensuring that users are being directed to the best performing areas, whether, it's for performance issues, for things like, GDPR, policy compliance, et cetera, again, huge changes taking place.
Yeah, it's a good segue. You just mentioned GDPR last May, and everyone in Europe is well aware of this. There's an increase in regulations, and actually the DNS traffic control can help customers with GDPR. What are your thoughts on the regulation issue?
Yeah, it's you're absolutely right with that, Bob. I know that specific. I think Europe is a little bit ahead of others when it comes to those kind of regulations. But again, ensuring that traffic, when required, remains within a particular region, a particular whether it's a country, a city, a town, whatever the case may be, is definitely a trend that we're seeing more and more of. I know here in Canada, we have customers that have specifically told us, when they're looking at cloud environments, that their data, if they're going to access a cloud environment, it needs to stay within Canada, right? So typically, trying to overcome that kind of a challenge is not easy. Now, the good thing is that with our load balancing solution, DTC, we do have some really nice functionality where we make use of things like our topology routing based on IPAM that we're going to touch on in a couple of minutes. So, we're definitely seeing that trend becoming much more popular now.
Well, and applications and network teams are also facing, the ongoing challenge of attacks, right? And that's one of the ththings, the DNS attacks just seem to continue. What are you seeing from that perspective?
So this is huge. I mean, we can't emphasize security enough, especially in the DNS world now. It's too bad that we only have an hour today and we're really focusing on DTC. But security is definitely one area that the Infoblox has definitely put a lot of resources in. DNS is extremely vulnerable. We know that. Customers know that. Hackers know that as well, right? They know port 53 is open in and out, and it's a very easy tool to do that. So again, having an overall solution that combines DNS, DHCP, IPAM, load balancing, that whole central visibility while providing secure DNS is extremely critical. And as you know, DNS attacks are certainly growing very, very rapidly.
Yeah, and so let's pause for a moment and turn it back to our attendees, and we would like to ask you to provide some feedback on the polling question that we have today. You see that now. If you don't see it, it perhaps is behind one of your windows. But this question, which best describes your company's current global server load balancing scenario? Maybe you're just trying to learn about some of the options. Maybe you have a solution already in place, but it's got some deficiencies. Maybe it's really expensive or hard to work with. Maybe you're actively shopping, or maybe you actually use DTC now and are here just to learn more. Go ahead and take a few moments and provide some feedback. And when we get a pretty good majority, we'll go ahead and share the results. We appreciate everyone's providing your feedback. It helps us to know kind of where things are at for you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're about 50% voting right now. And so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. And perhaps no surprise. So just sharing out the results, about almost 80% of the responders were here to look at what the options are and see what's out there. So, and then about 36% of those responded have a solution, but with some deficiencies. And so we appreciate your feedback. That helps us to know. And hopefully we'll do a good job here giving you the information you're looking for. Let's go ahead then and look on to the solution itself. Joe, let's talk about DTC. What is it? Can you just describe that quickly for us in a nutshell?
I will, yeah, for sure. So, from a real high level, it's it's a DNS focused global server load balancing solution. Okay, internally we like to call it intelligent DNS, where we're actually using DNS to not only perform a lot of the health, the DNS servers not only perform the health checks and things like that, but also use it to direct clients to the best available servers. Right? So from a
All
high
right.
level, that's what it is.
Yeah. And then, so just quickly, how does it work?
Right. So, like I mentioned earlier, based on configurations when it comes to specific routing algorithms, when it comes to health checks on servers, we're basically going to return the best, best or the ideal server's IP address to a request. So, for users trying to go to a web server, we're going to ensure that the IP address that gets returned is the ideal server.
All right. And then for those that are on the call, they're saying, well, what's in it for me? There's some pretty interesting benefits that they can get from DTC.
There is, yeah. So again, assuming that a lot of folks on the call are Infoblox customers, given the fact that we tightly integrate the DTC solution with our IPAN tools, being able to use things like extensible attributes to provide, kind of central and even global routing, having that single UI, being able to manage, DNS, GSLB all together. Deploying the solution is extremely easy. It literally, the good thing is the infrastructure is already there. So customers that have a grid already have everything that's needed, to set the environment up. And then finally, one of the things that really sets us apart is the fact that we can literally do, just over 90% of the functionality of a typical load balancer, literally at a fraction of the cost, right? And that's huge, nowadays when it comes to CapEx and OpEx savings.
Absolutely. Let's take a look, Joe, just you kind of touched on value there just a moment ago. One of the problems that a lot of folks have is if your apps are slow, and you mentioned it, either internally or externally, it gets to be really frustrating. We don't have a lot of patience anymore, right?
Absolutely.
We're able to move on to something else. So, the one thing about DTC is it really boosts user experience, and it really gives you the performance of your apps from a global perspective. Can you share some insights
For
on
sure,
that?
for sure. Yeah, for sure. So I mean, again, looking at several of the different use cases or options, intranet users, again, because of our unique ability to make use of IPAM and intelligently route that traffic, being able to support things like GDPR, et cetera, and things like that are is extremely helpful. Internet users, users coming from the outside, especially for things like banking customers, e-com type providers, things like that, being able to successfully use GeoIP and our extensible attributes to route users to the best data center or the best kind of geographically dispersed locations is extremely important. The other thing we do, just to ensure that we solve that performance issue is, a lot of the flexible server health monitors and the health checks that we do. And there's a couple that we've recently added that, we'll be talking about in a couple of slides.
A moment ago, Joe, you mentioned, the challenge of CapEx and OpEx, and there's some really expensive solutions out there. And the big problem is that when you have to add 2 or more servers, it becomes really expensive. But then having to manage it from an ongoing perspective is really also a big hassle. What kinds of things do you think of in terms of engaging with customers and what their needs and wants are?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest that we hear. Aside from the whole cost aspect of it, having that centralized management is absolutely key. Having that single UI that can perform all of the not only DNS and IPAM functionality, but also the global server load balancing, being able to do things like centralized upgrades, not having to manage a disparate system, have to provide some off the shelf or even highly customized reporting solutions for third-party tools, it becomes very, very difficult. So having that all-in-one solution, like what we provide, just makes things so much easier for customers.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things too, right, Joe, you talk about it being easy to use. We're going to show you in just a moment what the
Mhm.
user interface looks like, but the fact that you can actually go in and upgrade your grid in just a few clicks, right? Instead of having to go box by box. I mean, that is just a huge savings, especially if you're standing up new instances throughout your network.
Absolutely, it is.
So,
Yeah.
Joe, let's talk about the architecture a little bit.
Sure.
Can you walk us through this and give
Mhm.
us some insight as to how it actually all comes together?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I think I've mentioned this in the past. I'll mention it again. I'm going to assume a lot of folks on the call are either already Infoblox customers and have a grid set up, or at least know of it. So I'm not going to go into detail on kind of what makes up an Infoblox grid and how we communicate. But the diagram we're showing here is a basic architecture of a typical grid. So you've got the grid master, which provides the management interface, the centralized GUI, the centralized updates, all get controlled through the grid master. Then all the other appliances are basically what we call grid members, okay? And a member can do things like reporting. It can do our discovery when we talk about, being able to discover layer 2, layer 3 switches, devices, et cetera. We've got cloud members that can sit up in public cloud environments. So again, that's all tied together within the grid. Now, the nice thing is that for customers that have a grid, you already have the infrastructure needed to perform global server load balancing. It's literally nothing more than going to the DNS appliances that are authoritative for your internal zones and enabling the license, which we'll talk about, towards the end on how to do that. But yeah, I mean, from an overall perspective, that whole centralized management, and you'll hear the term grid thrown around quite a bit, does give us that whole, scalability, the distributed database. High availability is absolutely critical to our solutions. And most of the grids that we design, technically you could lose half of the grid, and still your end users wouldn't even notice you had an outage, right? And that's one of the beauties of the Infoblox solution.
So let's do kind of a side-by-side comparison, Joe, just in
Hmm.
terms of looking at what some of the traditional application delivery controllers do versus DTC. If you were to look at, you know, uh, traditional ones, there's a number of features to note. Can you walk us through those?
There are for sure. So typical traditional load balancers, ADC type solutions, they're going to be, kind of bolt-on tools to layer 2 and layer 3 devices. Um, you know, Typically they will be set up to do topology, based routing only based on subnets. So as new subnets come and go from a network, managing those becomes extremely difficult. Replicating that amongst multiple servers, becomes a challenge. One of the bullets there mentions RPZ. So for those that don't know, RPZ stands for Response Policy Zones. It's the tool sets that we use to provide DNS security. So being able to prevent end users from going to known malware sites. Typical, ADC solutions aren't able to provide that, right? API integration is extremely challenging. And for those of our customers that have used our APIs, you'll realize just how powerful those are. And again, doing the upgrades, very difficult. When you're talking about multi-vendor, multi-box solutions that aren't tied together at all.
Yeah, and I think the other thing just to note is the distinctions, right, with Infoblox DTC.
Correct. So, like we mentioned very early on, our whole DTC strategy is based on what we call intelligent DNS services, right? So, we're going to be using, DNS, which is ubiquitous everywhere. We're able to use that to direct users to the best location, best services, et cetera, based on topology, subnet, GeoIP as available. We do something very unique when it comes to being able to make use of our extensible attributes on the IPAM side, which we'll talk about a little bit during the demo. Fully integrated reporting, that's also part of the grid. Our API, extremely powerful. It comes very close to matching what can be done within the GUI. As a matter of fact, one of my customers, financial customers here up in Canada, use their API to strictly do all of their DTC changes within their grid. They've actually fully integrated it with Ansible playbooks. So again, extremely powerful solution. So very different than the traditional way of doing things.
Well, and I think one other thing that really sets it apart too, right, Joe, is the updates, because when you just have to go through and make a few clicks and you can update your entire grid, how helpful is that?
It's extremely helpful, yeah. And I mean, again, we've I mean, it's so seamless, so easy to do. You've got the ability to schedule updates, for our customers that are running HA pairs within the grid. You can literally do an upgrade during business hours, and you won't even have an outage of DNS and or DHCP. So it's we can't state that enough how critical that is.
So, hey, Joe, let's take a moment and just go through just quickly some of the load balancing methods that we use.
Sure.
There's round robin, ratio, topology, global availability. Can you just quickly touch on those for us?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, round robin and ratio are fairly similar. Round robin is it's considered the most basic of basic, right? So basically, you've got, let's say, three web servers, 3 IP addresses. As the requests come in, we're just going to cycle through 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 1, et cetera. So just, kind of reusing those. Ratio is very similar. Think of it as a weighted round robin method. We also support topology routing, where we do some pretty unique things here. We can direct users, to specific pools or servers, based on either our built-in GeoIP database or using our subnet, kind of subnet topology routing with extensible attributes, which is definitely unique to us. And then the last one we make available is global availability, where you can basically set up your pools and servers as a list, and we'll just kind of start going down the list when it comes to responding to user queries. So very flexible methods of load balancing, and these can also be mixed and matched within specific pools and things like that. Highly customizable.
So another aspect of DTC is the health monitors, and of course there's quite a number here. Maybe you can just kind of overview those for us as well.
Sure, yeah. Again, we do provide many different health monitors, things from very basic ICMP pings. We've recently made some changes to our SNMP health monitors as well. The idea behind the health monitors is that again, we're monitoring to make sure that when we return an IP address, it's the best available server. HTTPS is an interesting one because we're actually able to send a GET request and actually look for not only a response code, but specific content within a page, right, to truly ensure that that server is running.
And then in addition to that, one of the other aspects is the reporting and analytics that is available, and because of the integration, this is actually one of the reports that we have available. This is called the response distribution trend, and this is a use case would be, for example, to pinpoint some abnormalities on your network traffic distribution, and that of course could lead to impacted performance. For example, some of these spikes you might want to drill into. Can you talk a little bit about this particular one, just as an example?
For sure, yeah. So, for those that don't know, we do have a highly customizable reporting solution as part of the grid. And we do have, well over 100 canned reports. And what's nice is that we've developed some that are specific to DTC, right? So being able to monitor, kind of how our distribution of DNS queries has gone amongst different servers is important. You're able to monitor things like the health of the servers, which servers have been responding properly, et cetera. And the whole idea is, not only is it a reporting tool, but can also be used, to aid in, network performance checking, ensure that stability is there, et cetera, things like that. So it's a great tool to have. For those that don't know, we do have a free module available that is limited in the amount of data that will let you index on a daily basis. So for any grid customers that are not using reporting, I highly suggest that right after this call, you get in touch with your account team and make sure that they get you the free license for it, because it's definitely worthwhile.
And there's actually a whole number of reports that are available. We have dashboards. You can set up alerting as well, so that you don't have to actually go in and physically monitor the reports on a daily basis. You can set up rules to be able to get that kind of information delivered directly to you. It can be
Correct.
distributed to a team. So it's really a great advantage to have an integrated load balancer with a reporting capability.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk now about some of the recent updates, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but we want to just give you some view as to what some of the more recent features are. So Joe, one of these is RTD SNMP. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so what we've done in version 8.2, which was released about a year ago, year and a bit, is we've added in the ability to load balance based on round trip delay, right? Which basically means that the DTC servers will monitor the actual destination nodes, and they'll actually send a request out, compare it with multiple servers within a pool, and respond to user queries based on the one that's got the lowest round trip time, and that's a continuous process that runs, right? And we do the same with SNMP. Using SNMP, we can actually monitor the CPU utilization and load on a particular server, right? So now think of it, we're actually able to ensure that anytime a user wants to get to a service or an application, we're going to send you to the actual server that has the lowest load, right? And we can do this within a pool. We can do this amongst different geographical regions. It's extremely flexible. And again, the main benefit is response time, right? You want to make sure that your end users are getting the best experience they can, and you certainly don't want to send users to a server that's that's running 90% utilization when you've got one right next to it that's running at 10%. So that's the goal of both these new functionality that we've added in.
Thanks, Joe. Another one that we do is multi-tier health check support. And one of the things that we mentioned earlier was being able to just validate that each of the servers and a database along the path is performing optimally before you actually load a bunch of traffic that way. What are your thoughts on this one?
Well, you know what? I mean, this is an interesting one. I mean, it's one that we've recently added. And I guess the best way to explain it will be with just a simple solution. So for example, there may be an application web server front end that uses an authentication tool. Let's say it's Active Directory or a Kerberos or Radius server. Well, we now have the ability to not only monitor the health of that web server to ensure that it's up and running, but we also, part of that system is we can tie in that authentication server and make sure that it's up and running. Because it's no use sending users to a web server that when they go to try to log in, the authentication server is down. So we've added in the ability to tier those together. So now, customers can be assured that when we send them to, in this example, a server that needs an authentication server, that authentication server is definitely up and running. Right? So it's a great addition that we've added. We're getting a lot of good feedback on this one.
Thanks, Joe. State persistence is another one. And the use case there is a client logs in to an application and they're using the app, but then perhaps the Infoblox member fails over to another device. Well, if you're the user, you don't want to have to re-authenticate, right? So this is the capability to continue that state as it was before a connection was lost.
Correct. Yeah, and without spending too much time on it, what we've basically done is the ability to use the grid to actually replicate that state information across members, right? So, Bob, like you had mentioned, if a particular DTC node goes down and a user ends up, transferring over to another one, well, that other DTC server has the full state of that user's connection, right? Again, very interesting feature.
And that's one of the things we talked about earlier in terms of reliability, because that's the thing that, that's one of the indications of how, reliable the system is that you'll have that capability. Yep. Another one that we have is service record support. So this is a case where using Active Directory or video conferencing or voice over IP, those SRV records can their support to ensure maximum quality, response, and availability on that.
Correct. Yeah, yeah. We added this one into 8.3, and again, we've got some good use cases, whether it's Active Directory, voice over IP systems, things like that. Being able to, to now load balance SRV records in addition to the standard, A records, quad A's, C names, etc. Again, is a great benefit to users.
This next one, Joe, CSV export and import. If you're involved in our community at all, you'll be able to go on to Infoblox community and actually see a recording that we did on CSV import and export. But this really helps, right, when you're trying to import or export data from other tools. What thoughts do you have on this one?
It does, yeah. The CSV import functionality that we've built in the grid and we supported for many years it's extremely scalable, very easy to use. And we can literally take any data, put it into our CSV format, and import that data in. So, like you'd mentioned, when we get customers that are moving from one existing load balancing solution to us, being able to pull that data in using a simple CSV file is extremely helpful. Being able to export it, make changes to it, and re-import it right back in, being able to use that tool as a bulk change management tool, again, is also extremely useful. So, a nice addition to 8.3 that we added.
And actually, Joe, this is more than just your basic kind of add and delete, right? I mean, because
it is.
you have the capability to do merging, to do custom imports, et cetera. And so it's pretty robust, actually, a nice capability to be able to have that.
It is, yeah, absolutely it is.
One of the things that we did also with 8.3 is we enabled government cloud support. So we've operated in the government cloud, AWS GovCloud, since August 2016. We are certified for Microsoft Azure. We've passed the FIPS 140-2 requirements, waiting for the official announcement from NIST, but we also maintain common criteria EAL2 certification. We've done that actually since NIOS 7.1. And of course, we are on the DISA, which is the Defense Information System Agency and Approved Products List for DoD here in the States. So the important thing to know is that we can work on multiple FedRAMP infrastructures, and why that's important to commercial customers as well as government customers is that we are committed to NIOS and we are continuing our dedication to the high security standards that are required by government agencies. So just something else to kind of tuck away there as you think about it. And then in addition to that, Joe, we have some use cases, not going to spend a lot of time because we've kind of touched on some of these already.
Yeah.
But go ahead and just share a couple of your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so I mean, again, we've got the typical use cases. Like you mentioned, we did cover a lot of these off, internal, external applications, et cetera. GDPR is an interesting one that we're going to actually talk about, in the next slide or so, I believe. Being able to support hybrid clouds as well. SRV record support is also a really good use case we're seeing a lot. The other one we'll touch on a little bit more detail is CNAMEs for multi-tiered scalability. So really good for large, very large environments. And even, being able to load balance now amongst SaaS applications is becoming a great use case for us.
Exactly. Well, so you mentioned GDPR, right? So let's talk about that a little bit and how that works. And so what thoughts, what things can you share with us on that?
Right. So, I mean, when it comes to GDPR, I mean, again, being able to ensure that traffic remains within a particular region when needed is critical, right? And, I mean, again, given the way we do topology routing, especially with our extensible attributes, in the multi-pool example, being able to ensure that users that are in any subnets that fall within Europe will remain within, the European, pools and sets of services is important, right? So again, with the same platform, we're able to ensure that, users in Europe are directed to servers in Europe and maintain all the data there, while we take everyone else and we can split them amongst Americas, Asia, et cetera, right? So, so being able to do that is a really good use case, and one that our extensible attribute support for for IPAM networks really comes in handy.
Yeah, so you've got IPAM, you've got GeoIP, and you've got the extensible attributes that are all working together to help you really kind of define what areas that content is restricted to.
Absolutely.
Another thing, Joe, is using CNAME for multi-tier scalability. We had, talked about that, just touched on it. And sometimes you have multiple levels of decision making to be able to manage. What can you share with us on this?
Yeah, I mean, again, really applicable to larger networks. I mean, in this particular example we're showing here, I mean, ultimately what we're doing is we're actually doing global server load balancing using CNAMEs to balance amongst load balance domain names, right? So in this case, we can actually balance traffic between, different sets of LBDNs, one in the west, one in the east, et cetera, just to give you, that further large scalability. And again, it's all done by the GUI, extremely easy, using CNAMEs. It does allow us to scale to multiple tiers as well. And again, really geared towards, larger networks.
Exactly. Well, let's take a moment now. We're going to do a demo for you. And so I'm going to just give control over to Joe, and he's going to actually walk us through. And so, Joe, are you ready? Here we go.
I am. Yep. So what we'll do, folks, we'll spend the next couple of minutes. We're going to basically build a DTC environment right from scratch. Okay. What we're going to do, we're going to start off by creating some DTC servers, and these could be web servers, database servers, VIPs from other, load balancers as an example. We'll then set up some DTC pools. For this particular use case, we're going to use 2 pools to do it. Then we're going to take the newly created servers, put them into the pool, and then finally we'll tie them all together by setting up the actual load balance domain name, right? And then we'll kind of walk through what it is that we set up. So what we've got here is, we basically have a recorded demo that I'm going to talk to. So we're going to actually go out right now, and this is one of my colleagues' lab environments. So we're going to go out and start off by creating an actual DTC server themselves, right? So we're going to create 3 of them, and we're going to call them dub-1, 2, and 3. And we're actually making use of an extensible attribute that we've already predefined called town. Okay, so for those that don't know, within the grid, we're able to define these user-defined fields we call extensible attributes. So using this town attribute, we're going to set up 2 towns, one Dallas and one Paris, and we'll show you how we can we set up the various pools to make sure that traffic gets directed there. So here's the process where we would actually go through and walk through the wizard of setting the pools up, or sorry, the DTC servers themselves. We're going to assign, in this case, the first 3 servers. We're going to set the town up to be Dallas. So we're just going to enter that data here. And we're going to do a save and close. And then with the magic of QuickTime editing, we're going to automatically add in another server, dub-4, and assign it to the town of Paris. Right. So now we're going to actually go out and create a pool. Right. Will be the next step. And you can see here, it's all GUI driven with some wizards that are extremely easy to make use of. Right. So we're going to, in this example, we're going to also create 2 pools. Okay, so the first pool we're going to create, we're going to call this pool Dallas. Right, we'll click next. Yeah, and as far as the health monitor goes, we're going to use a basic SNMP monitoring for this particular one. And in this case, we're going to use just some, a very basic round robin. Right, so amongst those 3 servers, when responding, we'll just return them, in a round robin fashion. Okay, real simple. So we're going to finish off this wizard here. We're going to add in the pool members. So in this case, for Dallas, we're going to set up servers 1, 2, and 3 with the IP addresses .101, .102, .103, and again, we're going to use some some editing to just to kind of skip through this quickly. So we'll finish off the Dallas pool, and then we're going to automatically have the Paris pool created as well. All right, so we're going to go through new pool and get that added. And now we're going to actually set up the LBDN. So once we have the pool set up, the final step is going to be to create the actual load balance domain name. All right. So we're going to do this using this pattern. So anytime anyone does a query for www.freedyhome.local, it's going to go through the DTC load balancing process. Right. So in this case, we're going to set up the balancing method as global availability, which was one of the ones we spoke about earlier. We'll step through the rest of this wizard. In this case, we're going to use A records, quad A's, and C names, and we'll associate it with the zone, with our internal zone. All right, so we'll just finish typing that out, and we're going to assign both pools in this case because we want to balance, amongst both those pools. So we'll set that up and hit next. And in this case, we don't need the extensible attributes. Okay, so again, for Infoblox customers, you'll know anytime you see the yellow bar at the top, we're basically going to do a quick restart that'll start the services. And once we do that, we're going to see everything come up green. So again, one of the things we talked about earlier with the centralized management, et cetera, and the nice GUI, we can very easily see, we can see the visualization on the different pools and the servers that are associated. The green check marks basically show that the health checks have all passed. All right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to create or change that LBDN to topology-based routing, right? Which is the one that makes unique use of our extensible attributes. All right. So we're going to set the destination up to be the pool, and we're going to use, in this case, we're going to use a subnet rule. Okay, so we're going to set up the subnets, and we're going to basically say that anytime we see a query come from a particular source, right, in this case, we're going to use 192.168.1.0, we'll add that in to the actual rule, we're going to direct that traffic to the Dallas pool. Right, so this is basically saying that any users that are in that subnet will end up being load balanced to the Dallas pool. We're going to add another subnet, and this one will go off to the Paris pool. Okay, so we're just going to finish typing this out, do a save and close on that, and it's done. We'll set up extensible attributes, do a restart on that. Now, one thing I didn't highlight there was, you'd notice one of the options earlier was we had a default option. Think of it as a catch-all. So what we can do is, we can set up a catch-all pool for any users that don't fall within any of those subnets. We can have them automatically added to a particular pool for routing purposes. Right now, the other thing that we've added in here is the ability to actually test an LBDN, and this is extremely helpful. All right, so what this allows us to do, actually, let me just kick this off again. What this allows us to do is actually, do a full test of that end-to-end process. All right, so we're just going to finish off creating the topology rule here. Just jumping ahead of myself a little bit here. We'll hit save and close. I'm going to do another restart and get that ready to go. So that's the end. Now, one thing I will highlight is that, like I mentioned earlier, we do have the ability to test this out. Now, this is extremely helpful, especially, for those that have managed other load balance solutions where, very difficult to test an environment. We've actually built our test tool right into the GUI based on DIG, where you can specify where the source of that DNS query will come from. So you can simulate what a Dallas user would look like by specifying an IP address. You can do the query, and it'll actually walk you through and return the correct address. Right? So again, a very quick way to not only graphically build the environment, but also test it and ensure that, hey, when I go live with this, it's going to actually respond the way I expect it to.
Yeah, that was outstanding, Joe, especially, you know, when you consider the reality of how sometimes it takes teams to set up a whole project, right? Just to
Does.
test before they go out, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, I want to go ahead and pick up. We just have a couple of moments left. We may end up skipping through a couple of the slides here. I think I'm going to just move on past polling 2 and jump into our case study. You know, for those of you that are aware, the Hershey company is one of our customers, and they use DTC. Of course, they've been around for over 123 years, almost 15,000 employees worldwide. And their problem was they had slow app performance and availability. Can you imagine across all of the various servers that they use in each geographic market, and the management costs were just unbelievably high. And their app availability was also a huge problem because they wanted to make sure that they had local access for best performance in their local markets, but their employees were worldwide. And their other issue was disaster recovery, because they wanted to make sure that, you know, they could keep their applications up and running without any kind of impact. And so they chose Infoblox DNS, DHCP, and IPAM along with DTC, and they also used the DNS firewall. And the results were increased visibility so that they could use a single console to see both DNS and GSLB. They automated their processes and were a lot more efficient, especially with updating their grid. They had a far better user experience because it was faster and it was more reliable, and their internal employees were very happy because they could get to apps locally that they were struggling with previously. They also had the redundancy for disaster recovery, and ultimately the whole cost of the solution ended up being less than the maintenance alone on their other application delivery controller, and we won't say who that was, but it was just a fraction of the cost. So a great story. They said the ability to simplify DNS load balancing operations was a big factor in their choice. Infoblox is the only DDI vendor that integrates this, and that was Jason Seeger, their network solutions manager. So just a great story with Hershey. And Joe, just another one here. One of our global law firm customers, they have 11 offices in the US, in Europe, and in Asia Pac, about 2,500 employees. And they were challenged with global app availability, manageability, and visibility of their intranet and internet. And then, of course, they had a very rigorous disaster recovery process that required ongoing tests. They were slow, they were error prone and inefficient, and it took a lot of extra labor to make sure that that failover process worked. And they used DDI as well, DNS, DHCP, IPAM with cloud, and then also DTC. And they got a lot better experience because they automated, they were able to speed the deployment of their apps, and they were a lot more agile, rapid point and click deployment of the apps, and they were able to use the API to improve their disaster recovery test frequency. Their manager said DTC is easy to set up and use. UI is simple and elegant. The API makes it fast to automate record creation for virtual servers, and that was a huge time saving for them. Their existing ADC was expensive, complicated, took a lot of extra hardware, but DTC delivered all the services that were needed for less than the maintenance of the existing solution. So again, a couple of stories there, pretty important. So we're just going to cover quickly, we're almost out of time here, but what we've shared with you today is really how DTC can help you from a visibility, reliability, and automation standpoint. So it gives you full visibility, it gives you the cyber intelligence because we can share data, the threat feeds with 80 different vendor integrations. We support compliance like GDPR. We have the reporting capability. On the reliability side, we've talked about app uptime and performance and intelligent load balancing with our integration. We validate those servers. We go through health checks to make sure that everything is up and running. And then, of course, we can scale through the CSV import-export capability. And then from an automation standpoint, Joe walked us through and showed us how the application works, the topology discovery, the API capability that's out there, and our updates in terms of the grid, and then of course being able to share. So I mean, in a nutshell, it's a great overall solution. And again, as he mentioned, 90% of traditional functionality at about 20% of the cost. There are some license options, and we'll just touch on these quickly. Perpetual versus subscription, so it's a lower cash outlay. If you're looking at subscription, you get the upgrades. It's portable between physical and virtual appliances in the cloud, and of course that enables you to grow and upgrade your appliances. Joe, can you just touch? We're almost out of time. We are out of time actually, but can you touch on how they could try DTC today?
Absolutely, yeah. So like I mentioned earlier, for those that have a grid, you already have the infrastructure. So there's literally one command that you can enter on each of the DNS members to enable the functionality. And it's the set temp license will actually give you a 60-day fully functioning license where you can build the interface and try it out and do all kinds of testing with it. And again, reach out to your account team. Your local SC will definitely help you get that up and running. And it's at no cost to you at all.
Could they do that right now?
They actually can do it right now.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Pretty fast.
Yep. Yeah, very quick.
Yeah. All right. And then just quickly, lots of resources available on Infoblox website, datasheet, white paper, solution notes, videos. The Hershey case study is in more detail. The analyst report will be sending that out to you. We're certainly glad to discuss any load balancing needs you may have. We can even set your use case up in the lab. We have the ability to give you a cost benefit analysis as well. You can reach out. The number is there, and info@infoblox.com. So we didn't really get a lot of questions. We must have done a really good job. So as it's late in the day, we really appreciate everyone in Europe joining with us today. Thank you so much for joining. Joe, any last comment?
No, I think we're good. Again, thanks for those that took the time. Sorry, we did run a little bit over. Took a little bit more of your time, but hopefully you guys all found it helpful. And like I said, two things: real easy to use. Reach out to your account team, get that set up and running, and again, ensure you guys are all running the reporting appliance. It's free, so make use of it.
All right, well, that concludes today's presentation. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining. Have a great evening in Europe. And for those in the US, still our business day ahead. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Have a great day. Joe, thanks so much. Take care. We'll see you next time.
Quite welcome. Yeah, take care, everyone.